Good afternoon and welcome to Home Games. It's Wednesday afternoon at 12:30 with me, Steve Nelson, Insight Director of the Landcat, and I'm joined today by the ever effervescent, although maybe 10% less so today, Mr. Rohan Sivajoti from NextGen Planners. Hello, Rohan. Can you say hello and say something funny? Let's test that technology.
Afternoon all. Hi, Steve. How are you? I've got a wave now. We wave now on video, don't we? When we go into meetings and stuff, we wave at each other and
let's wave.
Yeah, let's wave. Let's do that.
So I got everybody on the chat wave to Rohan and I. So the reason I say that we are 10% less effervescent than normal is Rohan is very kindly joining us straight out of his sick bed with a near terminal case of overnight man flu, which is of all the illnesses one of the most serious. How are you feeling now?
I don't know. I imagine this is what childbirth feels like, isn't it? It's a similar thing, something like that. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Don't worry.
That's grand. I can see the people are starting to file in. Hello to everybody. Thanks to some of our people are actually waving back. Superb. They've Mr. John Bennett and Stuart has found the emoji, the wave emoji, two different wave emojis, which is unbelievable. Zoom wave phenomena. I can see from our attendees that we're joined by some of our regular audience. So hello and thank you for continuing to invest 35 to 40 minutes of your Wednesday with us. We are back from a hiatus. We took last week off with all the holidays and everything, but we are back with a packed agenda for the next 3 or 4 weeks. There is a vicious rumour circulating around financial services right now that maybe, just maybe, Mr. Paulson might be back next week. He's had an extended leave of absence from. Sorry, I'm so distracted by the chat. It's so unprofessional. But Sean's just said Forrest Gump on the shrimping boat wave, which is Lieutenant Dan, which, as we know, is one of the top 5 waves in all of the world. Listen. Home Games has been hopefully really interesting and all that. We've had various subjects and various guests throughout the weeks, and I love doing stuff like this. Home Games isn't the only bit of presenting I've done in the last few months. You know, there's various bits and bobs all over the sector, and it's probably fair to say that you know, I always get a little bit nervous before any form of public speaking, and I think that's human nature. Just to feel a bit like that, but there is an extra kind of layer of complexity to this chat that we're having today, and I think it's important to say that up front. And maybe complexity is not the right word, but it's awkward, and there's an elephant in the room in that there is no getting away from the fact that me, you know, white, straight, middle class male in financial services is hosting a discussion and a chat on sector diversity. So I think it's kind of incumbent on me to get that one out the way. And it's not like I'm, you know, crippled with stress about saying the wrong thing or offending anybody. It's not like that, but there is that level of you know, discomfort, and I think it's important to acknowledge that and to get that out there. People are still talking about waves in the live chat. Andy Schleider, what's the t-shirt this week, Steve? It's a plain white box standard t-shirt. I'm sorry to disappoint you. Maybe you can create your own imaginary t-shirt that I have on and a slogan down here. You know, of course, it should say #diversity or something like that, but it doesn't. Just one final bit of admin. There's nobody in the live chat talking about any audio or video issues, but if for whatever reason the audio and the video starts to lag, you can click that link, and Mr. Paulson's got a great technically accurate way of describing exactly what it does. I don't know what it does. I think it delays the stream by like half a second and does something clever in the background to bring the audio and video together. Anyway, all of that out the way. The one last thing to say before we start off with Rohan is that we listen to the people who attend, and we polled our audience a wee while ago and had a little bit of a survey as to what's gone down particularly well, and listened to your feedback. One bit of consistent feedback that we get is that when we get behind the role and behind the sector a little bit more and find out about the person, that seems to go down really well. We had a great session with Paul Feeney a couple of months back. The chat that we had with Ollie a couple of weeks ago, finding out his views, seemed to go down really well, along with one or two others. So who better to talk about something as important as this than one of my good friends in the sector, Mr. Rohan Sivajoti. And you know, the Landcat isn't going to fix, if indeed it needs fixed, sector diversity in the next 40 minutes. But at the very least, what we can do is have two guys have a nice down-to-earth conversation with each other and find out about day-to-day life and add a little bit of lightheartedness along the way if we can. So that's enough nonsense from me. If we can go back to deepest, darkest Darlington, where I think you are at the moment, Rohan, is that right?
Right, correct.
Say hello. So how has, standard question, how has lockdown been for you, Rohan?
It's been really nice. I'll be honest. It's been very nice to reflect on things. I'm a bit of a home bird anyway, so it's been just kind of nice to stay in, get life sorted, sell a house, try and move, do all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's been okay so far. Can't grumble.
Nice one. I think you're one of the 5% who seem to be quite cheerful about the whole thing.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, obviously it's dreadful for the many people out there, but business has been good, all that kind of thing. And yeah, personally, I found it okay, must admit.
Nice one. Right, let's dive right in, okay? And I want to find out a little bit more about you, about your history in the sector. But before we talk about all that, let's talk about Rohan Sivajoti, the person, and your family, and a little bit of background, because I think it's clearly quite relevant for the chat that we're about to have.
Okay, cool. First of all, I just want to caveat a couple of things that probably will be said over the next 40 minutes. I'm not an expert on this at all. This is my lived experience of diversity and whatever else. But as we sort of said in the green room, Steve, right and wrong, it's usually somewhere in the middle. So it's just worth having a decent discussion, isn't it? In terms of my background, I was brought up Chingford in North London between 0 and 8, and then lived in Wetherby in West Yorkshire for the majority of my formative years. Born to a Sri Lankan father and English mother, who've got quite a story, which I will go into at some point. I've moved around various parts of the UK, back to London, and now reside in Darlington, in between various financial services jobs, and aspire to travelling as well, and the university degree and all that kind of stuff. But that's whistle stop tour, Steve. Where do you want me to dive in?
Let's talk about your dad, because we had a wee chat. I don't want to break the fourth wall here, but we obviously have a little bit of a chat before we go live as to what we're going to talk about. But you've got a couple of particularly interesting stories about your dad and his experience of both growing up outside of work and some of the personal stuff that went on, but also his experience in financial services too. So tell me about your old man.
Yeah, cool. So this is sort of totally relevant in terms of, so my dad is Sri Lankan. He arrived in this country on a boat that took 2.5 weeks. I have to say at this point, he was not rowing said boat. He was on a boat. He arrived with his family, and there were him and his 9 siblings, and they all lived in a very small house. He had 3 jobs growing up to support the family, all that kind of thing. Obviously didn't know English, learn English, all that kind of thing. One of the jobs he had was with a large insurer, and that was where he made his career. And he worked his way up basically from making the tea to one of the directors for one of the largest insurers in the UK. He did that via just graft and hard work and all the rest of it. But there's a number of points in his career that I had a conversation with him. It was actually during lockdown, which opened my eyes to a world that I haven't seen in financial services, because I'm fairly fortunate in that I've had great bosses, worked in great places, and not been subject to the things he was subject to. So to give you an example, he worked his way through admin functions, that kind of thing, and wanted to become what was known then as a broker consultant, isn't it? A BDM, salesperson, whatever you want to call them. he had equal the amount of experience, if not more, than other candidates within the firm. He was impressing, doing all the right things, all that kind of stuff, and yet it took him 2 years longer to get the role than his other counterparts. And the only thing he could put that down to was the colour of his skin, and the fact that there wasn't a single broker consultant in the whole of the insurance industry at that time. So somebody that was going out face to face in business. So that's not just within his firm, that's within the whole industry. And eventually, after a couple of years and a lot of nagging, he got to a boss and a few changes of bosses that gave him a chance. And he regularly broke sales records with the company and the rest of it. And he puts that down to not blowing his own trumpet or being greatly skilled or whatever, which I'm sure that he was, but down to the fact that he was memorable, actually. So that was, way back in the day when you go and knock on the door and can I come in for a cup of tea sort of thing. And he remembers, the fact that that he looked different to other people. He wasn't the white guy with the slick back hair and the pinstripe suit and whatever else. That people would let him in, people would give him the time, and people would sit down and make him a cup of tea and talk to him, and just realise that, as we all know, we have way more in common than we do that separates us, right? Now, this continued to happen throughout his career, next into management positions, etc. He was always miles behind everybody else, not because of his ability, but because of the colour of his skin. It wasn't until about 10 years after he retired that one of his former bosses out of the blue got in touch with him and actually apologized and said that he was basically being racist. Said that he was overlooked because he was concerned what the rest of the company would think about promoting somebody of color at that time. Like I said, I'm incredibly fortunate not to have experienced that at all within financial services. Well, the odd thing here and there, in perhaps deepest, darkest Wales once upon a time. That, no offence to anybody in deep, darkest Wales. But
that's in money marketing tomorrow.
Yeah,
Director of NextGen Planning slams Wales.
There was, there was just, I mean, I'll talk about it. There was this one time down there when I was with an account, and yeah, somebody referred to me as a bounty, which is dark on the outside, white on the inside, which is probably not the nicest thing to be referred to as when you're trying to do a professional job. But look, the reason I talk about that is because we have come a long way. Like, this isn't, I know this is such a topical issue at the moment in terms of race, but it is important to see how far we've come. Like, that's stuff that I haven't experienced in the workplace. I have through school. I can talk about that as well. But like within the workplace, I think we have come a long way. We have got an awful long way to go. But I mean, in life as well, Steve. Like, so my old man, Sri Lankan, mum, English. They went out in secret for 7 years because my dad was supposed to have an arranged marriage and this kind of thing, and that was all like probably make quite a good movie one day. Talk about hanging out of windows and all this kind of stuff, avoiding people. But he used to he'd walk into a pub in London with my mum, and he'd be punched in the face before he got to the bar. Just the amount of abuse, people walking down the street hurling abuse at him because my mum was, a white woman with an Asian guy. And fortunate, I haven't experienced that, Steve. So yeah.
And is it something that to what extent does that form part of daily discourse within your family, is talking about these things, or is there just like over time an acceptance, this latent acceptance that is still rumbling out there, or because I'm trying to speak as someone who is entirely ignorant in the purest sense, not in a close my ears and look the other way kind of way, but in a I've not experienced this whatsoever. So can you tell me about, actually take a step back, tell me about you growing up, because I know you've got a couple of really unpleasant examples that we've talked about before.
Yeah. So it was kind of weird because when we moved to Wetherby, when I was 8 years old, so Wetherby is a town in West Yorkshire, 20,000 people. There were 2 families of colour in that whole town, and I never actually realised this until probably later into my teens. But I always felt a pressure, and that pressure was to behave and to make sure that my 3 younger brothers behave. And that was because I didn't want people thinking, if we didn't, oh, they're all like that. Because there was no exposure to people of colour from other people within Wetherby. It's just a very white, quite old town. And you don't sort of realise that till later down the line, the sort of social pressure of growing up with that. I also wrote about something recently, which, you know, I'm fairly ashamed of, actually, which was that in high school, one of my nicknames. So the high school we went to had like buses from Leeds come in, so it was from more multicultural backgrounds and things like that. So it was a slightly different picture at the school. But one of my nicknames in school was BPIT, so BPIT, which stood for Best Packy in Town. Okay. Now, not only is that deeply offensive to the Pakistani community and everybody else around, it's obviously deeply offensive to me because I'm Sri Lankan, I'm not Pakistani, but that was how people perceive people of colour at that sort of time. But the strangest thing about that was that I felt that was acceptance because I was the best.
Better than being third.
I was the best, wasn't I? Like, I was better than the others, and I accepted that. And I'm ashamed to say that I accepted that, and it's only when I look back afterwards that I can see how wrong that is. But a point I want to make here is around. I'd like to think that if that conversation comes up in a school now, it's knocked out before it's a conversation. Like, the amount of awareness around diversity and race and everything now is just huge, and those things don't happen anymore. Another example with my brother, he went to a slightly different school, and their swimming. So this was from the teachers. So the teachers had 3 lanes for swimming, and they had to put the kids in the lanes for who swims fastest and whatever else. And this is no word of a lie. 3 lanes. The teacher called them the fast lane, the slow lane, and the Asian lane, because the Asians aren't very good at swimming. And my brother is, by the way, is about 6'4". He's built like Michael Phelps. He probably swims just a little bit slower, but would be in the Asian lane. And you know, like, that's just unacceptable institutional racism, isn't it? More than anything else. And you know, other stuff, like I remember being on the tube and wearing my backpack to go into work, and people would you go and sit down next to somebody and they go and move away from you, like just things like that. Like, they go to the other end of the carriage to get away from you. Like, you don't realize all these sort of, I guess this is some of that privilege stuff, like some of the nuances around daily life and what it feels like to grow up like an ethnic minority. There is a bit of pressure there, and you know, I always encourage people to talk to the people they know, who are of perhaps a different ethnicity, whichever, and talk about and air those sort of pressures, just to try and understand them a bit more. I'm hoping that this will help to understand those, I guess.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, first of all, Rohan, is the first thing to say. And it's funny because speaking to you about this over the past couple of days or so, you know, one thing, you know, Rohan and I both have young children. We have, don't want to boast or anything, but we have some of the cutest kids in financial services coming through for the next generation in the next 25 years or so. But I look at, you know, my daughter Eva, who's about 10 months, and you've got, you know, Harrison, who's how old's he now? Is he 2, 3?
I'll tell you what, he's 4 on Saturday. So we share a birthday. So 34 and 4 on Saturday.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah,
and I, you know, in the context of a discussion like this, I look at, you know, the sliding doors effect and how they're going to, you know, permeate through life and live their lives. And I wanted to move on to some of we'll get onto financial services specific stuff in 5 minutes or so, but just really important that someone like me thinks about this in the context of what can I affect and what can I, how can I live my life to the best of my ability. And I look at things like social media in particular. So if you live a high proportion of your life in social media right now, right, you could potentially deduce that there's a class war going on, there's a left versus right, there's a culture war, and there's a race war. And we've seen the Black Lives Matter movement come to prominence over the past few months. But in terms of the effect that has on my life closes the moment I shut my laptop down or switch off Twitter. And I can then go in my cozy East Lothian bubble, which is a nice, safe and secure environment where, I'm surrounded by people who look like me, kind of. Do you know what I mean? Whereas I just, do you look at something like the Black Lives Matter movement and some of the aggravated tension and some of the like forceful opinions and incidents and protests and think, fuck, my life could potentially get 5% more difficult in the next, X number of months or so if this properly kicks off. So that's a real, divergence of how this kind of stuff is going to affect us on a day-to-day basis. Is that fair? Am I being ridiculous here? Or?
No, you aren't at all. And I'm very aware that probably after this call, I'll go for a walk into Darlington and use the Eat Out to Help Out or whatever it is to have my lunch. And I'll maybe bump into one other person of like colour or whatever. And again, I feel that social pressure even here. It's, I feel like I have to be happy, smiley with everybody because I feel like I'm representing a whole race or culture. Like it's absolutely bizarre. I mean, the BLM thing's been amazing in terms of the exposure that it is given these issues. We spoke before as well, Steve, about so two of my friends, one from school and one from university, and one of them is a big Scot lad, proper lads lad. The other one is a big rugby player, lives down in Marlow, proper lads lad. These are the kind of guys who don't talk about their emotions or whatever else, like just typical boys or whatever. And both of them off their own back got in touch with me and said, I'm conscious that we had loads of jokes growing up and whatever else, and if I ever said anything to offend you, I'm really sorry. Can you point me in the direction of more stuff I can read about this, or like tell me your experience of it and stuff like that? And I thought that was, if the message is getting through to those kind of people who are perhaps haven't thought about that before and are now, that it's a really good thing. And like I said, I don't. This isn't about lecturing people or telling people what to do or whatever it is, but it is about awareness. And like I said before, that example from my dad to me in school to schools now or whichever, I like to think we are becoming way more tolerant, and I like to think there is a lot of progress there, and it is important to just see that progress and celebrate it a little bit. It's not all doom and gloom. Like, there genuinely is progress, but at the same time, it can't be to the extent of tokenism or anything like that. Again, another very recent example. Within the last month, I was interviewed for a board position at quite a big cricket club. And it was quite clear from the interview and the questions that were asked that they were ticking a box. There was nothing about the skills that I could bring to that cricket board, business skills, anything like that. It was just all questions around my background and my heritage and my race and things like that. And I rejected the position just on the basis of that's just pure tokenism. So we can't go in that direction with it either. Nobody wants to be a token. Again, token was one of my nicknames growing up as well. Like just I don't know. yeah, nobody wants to be that person.
Yeah, no, that's the thing from South Park, isn't it? The famous there's like satirical point of view. They literally called the kid Tolkien
Yeah,
in the school to
yeah.
as a satire. Yeah, that's ridiculous. I think we should, and I should say, please keep firing through comments and questions for Rohan and myself on the chat. There's a ridiculous comment from Fiona Tate there. Not that the comment's ridiculous, but her experience of, can't tell you how many times I was told by schoolmates, "You're okay, you're pretty much white anyway." That's absolutely ludicrous. And hopefully we're moving towards a point where that kind of just low level offensive day-to-day interactions is hopefully easing, certainly in the school environment. Shall we move on to talk about financial services and your experience of financial services? And I think it's at this point we should broaden out the conversation, because we're not just here to talk about racial diversity. It is diversity in the wider sense, and I don't think we need to go all Sesame Street and start talking about the benefits of a diverse makeup of companies and employers and what have you. I would like to think that's fairly self-evident. But I was chatting about a couple of things yesterday to various people, and there was a statistic that a lady called Lucy, who hopefully is tuning in today, and I'm just going to get the article up on the old screenshot. And it was an article last year where it said that there was analysis done of FTSE 100 companies and board makeups and CEOs and what have you, and there were fewer women CEOs of FTSE 100 companies than there were people called Steve, which is one of those ludicrous kind of quirks. Now,
very, 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 very good news for you, mate.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm of course all in favour of disproportionate representation of Steves throughout the country, for we have toiled from generation to generation. Steve lives matter.
That's ridiculous, isn't it?
Wow. But it's just ludicrous, and we all have experience of going to large meetings, or seminars are probably the best example, or conferences where the lack of diversity and gender imbalances is absolutely stark. Obviously, I think you would echo that point, but in your experience, particularly with what you're doing with NextGen, can you tell me a little bit about some of the things that you've seen in terms of the next generation of planners coming through? Is it getting better? Is our sector getting better?
It is, yeah. So I think the last cohort we had of the training contract was 70% female to start with, which was incredible, really. Membership is around about 35% female, which is a lot higher than a lot of the other industry averages and stuff. But yeah, with this kind of stuff, I think you've got to find that balance between role models and tokenism, or whatever it is. There is a balance in the middle there somewhere. So it's not just promoting diversity for diversity's sake; it's for a reason, and it's it has to be done justice. Our example of that, and I would love if a lot of us could make this kind of similar pledge, really, is that as a board at NextGen, we decided that we won't sit on any panel sessions or whatever it is unless there's female representation, because that isn't an accurate reflection of the society and the profession that we want to reflect. And we've actively challenged people on that when they've said that to us and made them go and change their ways. So I would hope others would join me in doing that at the sort of very least. But in terms of this role models thing, and a lot of us after this, or probably during this, if you're getting a bit bored, but probably we'll go back to tweaking model portfolios and looking at stuff for clients and whatever it is. If you look at the investment providers within that portfolio, or even the platforms that you use or whatever, and just have a quick Google of the senior leadership teams, and tell me from looking at that how people from different backgrounds can see themselves working in financial services is very, very difficult. It is very, very one direction, let's just say. But it is about promoting role models. It absolutely is that. If I look to the people within my life that I look up to as role models. You know, I know it's the cheesiest, most obvious one to say in the world, but people like Barack Obama, like, who I think can genuinely bridge divides and make real difference and that kind of thing, who've come from adversity, that kind of thing. My other terrible example is Tiger Woods. Because personally, he's an absolute shambles, but stuff that he's achieved and the adversity that he's gone through, from, you know, going through the white golf clubs and the way that he was totally knocked back by sort of various people. But these are people who are role models for me. They are of colour because they're people that have had to be uncomfortable in their own skin at some point and then gone on to make a real difference and do something. And so that's what I mean by, in terms of, you know, more people with disabilities, LGBTQ plus, female, race, whatever it is, we need more of that at sort of senior level, but not as a token gesture, like on merit, these people are incredible, but also to promote them as role models so other people can see themselves in those shoes.
So using sport as an example there, are we then not doomed, but are we resigned to this not getting better for a generation, really, at board and senior level? Because if you look at, so the example I would always use, you know, I'm a huge tennis fan, and the 11th best tennis player in Longniddry, according to the latest league table. I told this to talking about dads being role models. I said that to my dad at the weekend, and completely deadpan, he looked at me and said, "Aye, Steve, there's 12 in that league, isn't there?" Thanks for all your faith in me. 17. But I use tennis as an example, which is, you know, a kind of famously whitewashed sport, partly due to the composition of it being seen to be an elite sport, which is true in terms of the costs of access to courts and coaching and all those kind of things. But if you look at, you know, the two best examples and you know, legends in the game now, Venus and Serena in women's tennis, you know, that you can't just suddenly open the floodgates and things change overnight. It takes, you know, a generation to almost wash its way through the system. And now you're seeing young American ladies like Sloane Stephens and Madison Keys and Coco Gauff coming through, you know.
So I was just about to say that for those three tennis players you just mentioned there, Coco Gauff, Madison, and the like. And it's like, if you ask them, and I've seen the interviews with them, who were their role models growing up, it's Serena and Venus. It is. It absolutely is. And it is like, people to be able to become inspired to do this stuff, to make real change, to really go for a career, need to see people like themselves in those positions. So striking that balance, though, is just so hard between tokenism and being a role model.
So without your dad, without your dad working in financial services, would you be here right now, or would you be doing something else, do you think? So what was it that got you into? So
I get to say this, right? I didn't fall into financial services. There you go. I'm the first person ever that said that, right? So yeah, because I chose to do a financial services degree. I actually had three things I was going to do. One was that, which I went with in the end, but the other was join the police, and the last one was go to drama school. So could have been a very, very, very different life, couldn't it? So yes, I chose it, but absolutely that was because I looked up to my dad, and I could see that was a career that I wanted to be involved in. So that the more we can do things to put people up on pedestals would be great. You know, again, our other, like, we have to practice what we sort of preach as well. In terms of our conference last year, 30 speakers, half and half in terms of gender and that kind of thing. We have LGBTQ plus representation throughout all of that as well. Loads of different ethnicities, races. Just like, you know, we have to showcase that. It is our duty to do that, and it's not waiting around for other people to do it. It's just you know, go and affect it as much as you can.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I saw a statistic the other day, and I was going to ask you about this, and it's just come to mind. Looking specifically at lockdown, so you've got to believe a number of things are true for this to come to fruition. But if you believe that lockdown will usher in a new era of work-life balance and flexible hours and flexible working patterns and remote working, then arguably that will help enable a fairer gender split in terms of the pressures of home life and the school run and childcare and all those kind of things. I know I'm certainly living through that right now, to various degrees of success. I made a meeting this morning with about 24 seconds to spare after taking Emily to school, who definitely didn't want to go to school. Like, is that fair, or is that, wishy-washy, hopeful guff that we like to attach ourselves to rather than taking actual action?
I don't know. I've not really thought about that too much, but I can see from what you're saying there how it could be beneficial in terms of diversity, and that yeah, absolutely. If there's going to be more sort of home working and that kind of thing. I don't know, Steve. I haven't got too many thoughts on that, I'm afraid.
Yeah, me neither. I can't figure out whether
I can't figure it out.
I can't, and I know there's a huge wave of companies coming out there saying, you can work from home and it's for the foreseeable, but there's just a niggle at the back of my mind that thinks humans are humans, and once normality happens at some stage, whether that's a vaccine or whether this is going to, ease off in a couple of years, who knows, that we won't just get back to normal because of learned behavior and whatnot. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe people in the comments might have a view. Listen, we're coming up to the end of our time. There's about 2 or 3 minutes to go. And one of the things I was going to do is ask you, Rohan, if you've got any questions for me. As someone who has led a life that hasn't been impacted in any way, shape or form by who I am, color of my skin, my, sexual orientation and gender and what have you. The only time that I've ever felt uncomfortable is sometimes at big industry dinners when I was new to the sector. So I had a very ordinary kind of working class background in Fife. And that's a privileged life if that's the only thing you can think of where you have felt uncomfortable because of your default position of who you are. And for me, that's almost the definition of white privilege, really, irrespective of everything. I've had shitty times and what have you, but it's not been caused by who I am. What would you say to someone like me? How can I do things better or educate myself better?
So first of all, seek someone's permission to do this. But I would say try and have a conversation like this with somebody who you want to have a conversation about a certain issue with, anything, whether that's any layer of diversity, whatever that is. Seek permission to have that conversation and just ask them some questions like, I'm happy to talk about this stuff with anybody. People are generally happy to talk about this stuff because they kind of want to get it off their chest a bit as well. And it's that seeking to understand and to learn before making any kind of judgment. I mean,
sorry, just to interject. I've certainly found that with the mental health stuff where, I'm almost desperate to talk about it half the time. And, people only have to ask. So yes, it's certainly worth doing. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. No problem. I mean, in terms of what you said there, question for you, that kind of thing. Obviously the BLM movement has just made such a huge impact, in terms of just, watching every sports star do it on the telly and everything. It's just a huge impact. And I think it's going to be great in the longer term for society. What was sort of your reaction to all that, and what were the things that you seeked out and learned from it, and perhaps, went away and did some further reading, that kind of stuff? I'd love to know your reaction to that.
So my reaction to the Black Lives Matters movement was an almost resignation of I can't believe this is still going on, really, and of genuine ignorance. That I don't have to think about it at all in my day-to-day life. It doesn't impact me at all. So there's a real understanding of how lucky you are. And, you know, there's kind of tedious discussion, particularly on social media, about white privilege and, you know, all lives matter and all that kind of stuff. But it's, you know, a lot of that is willful, kind of malicious ignorance for me anyway, and I could be wrong, but, you know, of course all lives matter, but that's not what this is about, candidly. So I guess a kind of resignation and fatigue about the whole thing. Actually, it made me think about, you know, growing up, how, you know, little I had any direct experience of it. But what it made me think of actually was going back to being at school and some of this stuff that kids must have had to put up with around homophobia in particular, because there was no racism in you know, the changing rooms and the classrooms where I grew up, because there was bloody no one there. You know, it was a West Fife background I had, and there was virtually no one of colour at all, really. But it made me think of related issues and how actually you can have this, you know, collective institutionalized behavior where no one specifically is at fault, but, you know, kids are awful as well, as you know from growing up, and we all fear the other, you know, and want to be part of the crowd and want to protect ourselves. And it made me quite sad to think of, you know, some of the classroom chat that I would have participated in at the time. And it's not like, you know, I don't carry a burden of guilt, because, you know, I was ignorant at the time, and you grow up and you develop and you know, hopefully get better as a person. But, you know, you think back and think statistically there must have been a percentage of kids who would have been, you know, uncomfortable and unhappy because of that kind of thing. And that's not a great feeling. So
totally. I vividly remember the homophobia thing throughout school as well. There would be regular terms thrown around like gay or gay bar or something, just to insult somebody, use it as an insult, like it was as common in language as a yes or a no or whatever else. And again, I'd like to think that in today's society and in schools and that it's, you know, that and this is what I mean by that progression, is that that's not acceptable anymore, and people don't tolerate that, and people know that. So yeah, it is still sad, isn't it, when you sort of look back at things like that and think, geez, like.
Yeah, but I think it's also important to acknowledge where you've maybe been wrong in your life and just learn from it rather than dwelling on it as well. And the thing I worry about the most actually is that we seem to be losing the ability to be wrong and to talk around it and to form a consensus and understand each other. It could just be because at night I spent too much time on Twitter reading, you know, by definition, restricted arguments because of character limits. And, you know, can you remember a time where someone on Twitter has ever said, "Oh, well, that's a good point. That's made me change." Like, no.
That's so. There is a way around that, of course, which is I'm not on Twitter, Facebook, any of that anymore. As of about 6 months ago, because it just became nonsense. It's something I don't miss, something that doesn't add to my life. If I want to go and read up on something, I'll go read up on something, without having to, exactly what you said there, read 180 character someone's opinion on something. Yeah, it doesn't add anything.
No, it doesn't. It really doesn't, and that's a nice note to end on. Like, listen, we're at the end of our time. Thank you to Rohan for your time. Thank you. A remarkable amount of people have stayed on till the very end. Well over 90% of you. So, thank you very much. I know it was hopefully it was thought provoking. The Landcat were never going to fix diversity in 40 minutes, but I hope what we have done is had a nice down-to-earth chat with one of the nicest guys in the sector, and hopefully learned even a little something along the way, which will make you think going forward. Listen, next week, if you're good, much like Beetlejuice, if you say the words Mark Polson, Mark Polson, Mark Polson 3 times, you might well just appear. We're going to have Verona Kenny from 7IM, one of the leading lights, and one of the greats in financial services from 7IM, join us next week. That's about it for us. If you like this kind of thing, we've got the huge archive on YouTube of 20 or so home games that you can go on. Please like and subscribe, like all the cool kids say now. So thank you very much, and see you next week. We better wave, Rohan.
We're going away. What's the Forrest Gump one?
Yeah.
What was it?